I'm Janice Degni. I work for Cornell Cooperative Extension in the Florida County region in central New York, south of Syracuse, Portland, Coweta County, Tompkins County, where Cornell is located, and Boone counties. I've been with Extension for 20 years now, and it's been basically the lifetime of my professional career. Graduated from Cornell with a bachelor's in agronomy and a master's degree in plant protection. So I work primarily with dairy farmers, organic dairy farmers in our area, and we wanted to see, because our dairy farmers, cultivation and corn comes at the same time as first cutting hay harvest, and there's always a huge labor crunch. So we wanted to see if we could use some practices to reduce the number of cultivations in corn production. That particular practice in the study was using narrow row corn. We wanted to see if we could eliminate cultivation of 15-inch row corn versus 30-inch row corn. I had two farm cooperators. The one farmer that came to me with this idea had tried it casually in the past on some hill acres and thought it had worked well. So our treatments were row spacing. And then we thought, since we were going to be evaluating the time weeding, we wanted to see if there would be a population reduction or how much population thinning happened from this time weeding. And then we wanted to see if late season cover crops would have any effects suppressing later germinating weeds. What we learned, I did a screen on the bottom, you can see I was just testing some different types of cover crops. The cover crop, the story really was too little, too late, and you'll see that. So this was off field scale, 2 different farms, two different fields with 2 different soil types. 12 row plots planted with a 6-row planter. And we had a very experienced custom operator plant, and we relied on him to double back and do the 15-inch rows. And although we've done it many times before, a 15-inch row spacing was not very consistent. You'll see back some of the pictures. And the cover crops were seeded after the final cultivation. We took population counts after the first time weeding, we measured yield. We took population counts at harvest. And then the intent was to measure the cover crop cover, but it was insignificant. So we chose several different cover crops to test: bursting clover, which is an annual clover, winter clover, or red clover that would persist over the winter, annual ryegrass, and then a ryegrass red clover mix.
Is that the medium red?
Yeah. So this was the first farm field of planting. The farm cultipacked the field, which really impressed me because few conventional farmers cultipack, but this was to improve seed to soil contact, which it did for the corn, but it does also make an excellent seed bed for the germinating weeds. This study is from 2008, which turned out to be a really decent crop year. We didn't have any summer drought or anything. And I would say this planting date is pretty typical for our area, for both conventional and organic farms. The organic farms go a little later, hoping the soil temperature will be a little warmer. This wasn't particularly warm when we planted 50 degrees. So we actually laid out the plots about a day after the first time weeding. The corn was germinated, and you can see in this field we had quackgrass coming pretty strongly. Look at that, quackgrass across the field. So time weeding is basically an effect on quackgrass. And then we also, so this has been time weeded once, and the corn has germinated now. The first time weeding was blind, the corn was emerged. You can see we're starting to get some broadleaf emergence, and there's good soil moisture in the field. So this was actually ready for the second time weeding. You can see the weed pressure. This is actually site 2, my second farm, which my first farm had a very level field. You'll see the second farm, it's much more sloped.
Did you raise the tines for in row?
No, the tines are. I have pictures of the time weeding that was not raised. So this is the second field. You can see it slopes up, and you can also see here that our narrow row corn that should have been evenly spaced was was more like a twin, ended up to be more like a twin row corn. They're more like 7 inches apart than 15 inches apart. So, and that really was just a machinery issue. We didn't have a 15-inch row planter, and it's very difficult to do it with the 30-inch row double back on itself. So here's the flex tine harrow in operation. I've got a couple pictures in succession. If I click fast enough, it'll almost look like the tractor's operating. So I just wanted to. So remember, the first one of these is done blind. This was the second one. So on farm 1, they tine harrowed 3 times. 5/24, which was 3 days after planting. Again, about a week later on May 30th, and then about a week later on June 7th. Farm 2 only had a chance to do 1 time weeding, and it was 11 days after planting. So this is farm 2. This is after the time weeding, so it was 11 days after planting. This is mainly crabgrass. So it was already too well established for them. You can see a few spots in the field where you can see some dirt, but basically the tines just bounced off the crabgrass. Just couldn't rip it up. So really, one of the things I learned from this study was that timing of field treatment and skill of the operator, because it's 2 different farms, 2 different people cultivating. The equipment was different on each farm. A lot of it really comes down to skill of the operator. So in terms of, did we see population thinning from the cultivation efforts? Yes. It averaged between 10 and 20%, and it really didn't make a difference if it was a narrow row corn or a wide row corn. So this was farm 1. The thinning was about 10%. Okay, I think I saw the slide there, and it was almost 20% in the second farm. So just a little bit later in the season, this is that crabgrass again. You can see it's pretty aggressive. The corn's getting a little bigger. You can also start to see some color changes in the corn. Right here you can see the narrow rows, and that corn is already stressed at approximately the 4-leaf stage, 6-leaf stage. This is, I'm sorry, this is back at the first farm where it was time weeded 3 times aggressively, but because of the quackgrass, you see the quackgrass in it pretty thickly. Switching spots really switched the effectiveness of my clicker here.
You can come back.
Maybe I just need to move this way. All right, so this is, so first farm 1, 3 time weedings, and then cultivation. So you can see how nice, what a nice job I did on the quackgrass in the 30-inch rows. To the left, directly to the left, we had 1 set of 10-inch rows, so the planter double backed on it twice to see, how narrow we could get and if it would have a larger effect. But we didn't measure anything on the 10-inch row, it was just for observation. So here's a cultivator, site 1. And that farm cultivated twice, once on June 12th and a week later, 2 weeks later on 6/28. You can see the corn's knee-high, getting knee-high or better with the cultivator. So they cultivated until it was too high to get through with the machine. So this is back to site 2, the slightly graded site. And you can see, right, this was the narrow row corn, that it's really starting to show some stress. So this was time weeded once. We saw that we didn't get good control, and then it got wet, and it held the cultivation up. So then the cultivator was sitting in the field, and they finally did get 1 cultivation done. And you can also see where we're grading up the hill. Some spots were excellent, but in a lot more spots, we couldn't clean up the weeds within the row. And then on a hillside, you're going to have some cultivator blight. Really, even on the flat fields, you get some spots where you get off a little. You can take out a little bit of the row. You can see mustard coming in. Both fields had some mustard. But you can already, the color of the corn is already affected. There's obviously stress in that field. So So moving later in the season, this is, cultivations are done now. We see mustard in here. There was no cultivation on the 15-inch row, just the tine weeding. And there's still the quackgrass in there. And what you don't see is the ragweed that was in there, terrible ragweed. And there's just a contrast with the corn that was cultivated. There's a little bit of mustard, but nothing compared to the corn on the left. After the final cultivation, that's when we went in and I hand seeded the cover crops. And where there was bare soil, they got good seed-soil contact. But in that second field where we just never got any weed control with the mechanical devices, it was a nightmare. You can see the corn in mid-July was nearly hip high. And it was very frustrating to do that handwork and know it was going to have no effect at all. But we did it. The cover crops did germinate, but this is early August, so this is a couple weeks after they were seeded. But by the end of August, there was really no significant growth because the corn was already too tall and shaky. So my assessment was too little, too late. You really have to go in with a cover crop in the spring and crimp it or roll it. But the problem in our area with that is our growing season is so short. By the time you can safely crimp a small grain, you don't really have much season left for it. Whereas in Pennsylvania, where they've done it successfully, they have 2 or 3 more weeks of growing season. So getting ready for harvest now, this is site 2. This is a view from the front with the different treatments. So this is the 30-inch corn, 15-inch corn, 30-inch corn again. And you can just really see how stressed that narrow corn looks. So this is, the bottom is a side view. And so there is, within the field, a lot of variability, just differences in the soil. So nice corn in the front, quite tall. And then even some spots in the narrow row corn looked pretty decent. That corn was tall, it had great color, it had decent ears. What we ended up doing there, the initial intent was to hand harvest everything as grain. Because this field was so weedy, there was no way we could hand harvest it. And I had, my plots ran the length of the field, and then I had them blocked perpendicular for the cover crop work. We just harvested the whole length of the field as one wrap, and we had 4 wraps for both the 30-inch row and the 15-inch row. So at this farm, mechanical silage harvest, and 4 reps to compare. So what we ended up with, which was pretty surprising, was that the narrow row corn yielded identical to the 30-inch row corn. Now we didn't separate it to see how much of that was meat versus corn, but we averaged about 7 tons of corn silage under both treatments. And that's the natural cover crop that remained after harvest. A lot of weed pressure. On the first site, we were able to do grain harvest. We did a hand harvest. So we 40-foot a row, 2 rows wide for each plot. And there's a shot of the 30-inch rows at harvest, and a shot of the narrow rows. And I almost thought the narrow rows were a little bit greener. I can't tell now. I don't know if you can see it from your place in the room or not. And then this was done 2008, and I can't remember if there's a significant maturity difference in terms of moisture. I was looking through my papers, and I didn't bring that data with me.
So those narrows have twice the plant density, though, right?
No. Thanks for saying that, Rick. We have the seeding rate so that we kept a population consistent between the wide and the narrow row. On this farm, we were shooting for about 36,000 seeds per acre, and I believe on the other farm it was a little bit lower, maybe 34,000. But when we planted the narrow rows, we dropped that in half, so we have the same seeding rate. There was a visual difference between the narrow row corn cobs and the wide row corn cobs. I hope the picture captures it. The narrow row corn ears were generally smaller, poorer tip fill, and a poorer pollination in general. And I can tell you, hand harvest was just a nightmare in those narrow rows because the ragweed was at least head high on the over my head. And I mean, you had, my clothes were green from top to bottom just from all the weed pressure that was in there. So, okay, this is my final. In the end, the 15-inch row yielded about a third of what the 30-inch row warranted on the spot. And this field was, if you look at the yields, the soil types graded to the back of the field. The back was a wetter area that didn't drain as well, and it was heavier clay. So the soil was much chunkier. It didn't work up as nice. And you can see in our first rep, 130 bushels, and in our fourth rep, 106. So there was variation in the field. That's my story.
Great. Time for questions?
That is a standard paper. Yeah, that was when we were doing the population checks. That's when that bird was out there having a fit, chasing us away.
They fake injuries.
Yeah, that's what they were doing while we were counting. So basically, everything we tried to test was a failure, but I think in some ways it was still instructive. And it was only one season also. So, you know, you can't generalize too widely in one season, but whatever the weather pattern, the rainfall needed weed control.
I mean, also the weed community seems like that would be a bigger factor. That would be, I mean, that's a perennial species that you're dealing with versus having to deal with pigweed, right? Or some other species that might be a little more susceptible.
Well, they were different. The weed species definitely affects it, but it was the crabgrass in this first farm. There's crabgrass in the second farm, which isn't annual. It just got too established before the time we went through it. They couldn't take it out after that.
Now, with those narrow rows, was a farmer able to cultivate?
No, and that was the
Because they
intention,
vary.
not to cultivate. They're trying to eliminate
Just the time
cultivation.
weeding?
Yeah.
was the only control. Yeah, are there farmers here, I'm from Minnesota, and a number of farmers using GPS, you know, guidance systems and doing this, you know, double planting, but, you know, very precise. Is that happening here at all?
Well, we're just starting to get guidance systems in our area, maybe in the last couple of years. So I was thinking about that as I reviewed this data. If we had had a guidance system, I'm sure our 15-inch rows would have worked out much better. Some people do have planners. We didn't have access to that. So this is